again, pretty quick, easy fly. There's essentially, other than a ribbing, there's two materials and a bead. The tail is pheasant, the body is pheasant, the rib is just plain wire. So yeah, we'll get started. There's a few different ways to do this. I'm going to do this kind of the easy way, where I'm going to tie in my tail and I'm going to tie in my body. If you're comfortable, you can use the same fibers that make your tail to make your body, and it's one less step to do. But I'm going to do it the easy way, just to kind of show you the basic way to do it. But if you're tying a bunch of them and you have a limited amount of time, it's nice to do it the fast way, using one piece of, or one clump of pheasant tail fibers. So if I were to do this, there we go. My bead was actually upside down, so this is, again, the correct position. And usually it wants to stay where it's supposed to be. It doesn't always, though, so it's something you got to kind of pay attention to. And again, if you hold this out of your vise like this, that is in the correct position. So if you hold it and look at it and kind of orient yourself as to where the slot is, that's going to help you in the long run, so that you can just quickly identify if it's upside down or not. So I'm going to start my thread, and you can tie this with any thread. Again, because we're putting a hot spot on it, I'm just going to run with, fluorescent orange. You can tie it with black and then just add orange at the very end over your last whip finish, and basically just do another whip finish with orange. I'm going to do it all with one, just because it's one less step. So I'm going to start my thread right behind this bead, and I'm going to build up a little bump here. And you can see how that bead's jumping around. Eventually it's going to stop. And I'm not quite there yet. Let me cut this off. You can also hold your fingers up to it to help build that bump. And so that bead's now in the correct position, and it's not going to go anywhere. So I'm now going to move my thread back down to where the barb would be with these jig hooks and what they call tactical hooks. They're all barbless, because in international competitions you're not allowed to use barbs. So they've adapted that to these everyday flies. But right here at the bend, I am going to take about 5 or 6 pheasant tail fibers. And if you take this, when I'm at home, I don't cut little chunks off the tail. I just leave the tail whole, and I'll pull some off. But if you take your fibers parallel to the stem at 90 degrees, it's going to line these tips up. And I don't know, I think I've got 6 there. I'm going to pinch these so that they're all lined up, and I'm just going to pull those off. I'm now going to make sure that those tips are aligned, and I want my tail, I moved my bead, to be about a shank length.
This is the most common.
Just that long. Yeah, you can, if you make them super long, like that long, they can foul, believe it or not. Most people think fouling tails are with mainly streamers, but I've seen these tails foul. I like about a shank length, so right about there. So I'm going to take this material and I'm going to set it right where I want it. I'm then going to change hands. I'm going to do 2 wraps. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to look at it. And I like where those tails are. If they're too long, you can take the butts of these fibers and actually slide it You know, so I'm gonna make them too short here. So I can grab these and slide these. And if you don't like it, just pull them all out, undo those 2 wraps, and remeasure. You're not stuck with where they're at. You can always change them. Get 1, 2 there. Make sure it's on top. And then I'm going to take my wire, in lieu of tying all this in and then going back down and building bulk, I'm going to take my wire and I'm going to set it on the side closest to me. It's going to be kind of hard for you guys to see, but in that same tie-in point, I'm going to capture that with 2 wraps, and I'm going to start binding all of this down, moving up the shank, right up to the bead. And then I'm going to take my scissors, I'm going to cut these butts off, because we don't need those anymore. And then I'm going to move back down to that initial tie-in point of our tail and our wire. And I'm going to take another 4 or 5 pheasant fibers. Ideally tips aligned. Let's see here. There's 5. I'm going to rip those off again. And instead of tying them in this way with tips pointed back, I'm going to tie these in tips forward. Because as with any natural material, I've got nice sparkly nails today. My daughter got creative with nail polish. They have a taper. They get thicker towards the butt, and we want to utilize that in this fly. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to capture these with a couple loose wraps, pull them down just a little bit. The tips of these are very fragile, so you have to be a little careful with these. And now I'm going to wrap these in all the way up to the bead and leave my thread right at the bead. And so now I have these tied in and I'm ready to start my body. I'm going to warn you, I'm going to be kind of a lot of fingers here. You can, if you want, use hackle pliers to do this. I find that when you have more than one material that you're trying to grab onto, inevitably one piece is going to have slack in it. So I tend to do it with my fingers. And I'll show you the technique I was shown. So once I get my material around the back, I'm going to use my left index finger and I'm going to pinch it. And now I'm going to come back over and pinch, and that just allows me to let go of it and get my fingers and the material back on my side of the hook. And again, I'm just going to do touching turns so that there's no orange coming through, or very little orange at the very least. And I'm going to continue to wrap this up. The hard part here is not dropping it or letting go of it. And once you get right up to the bead, you're going to wrap one wrap behind, and then I can let go and they're not going to go anywhere. I'm going to do a second wrap behind, pull tight, pull everything back, do 2 more wraps again just to lock everything in so I can let go of it. And I'm going to cut these as close as possible. And now for the wire, this is to add durability. If you want, before you do the body, you can put a little super glue down. I would not use your finger to hold it in that case, because you will super glue your finger down. It happens. So to add durability, I'm going to wrap in the opposite direction. My body went over and away. I'm going to go under and away. And you can really pull on this wire. It's pretty, I think this is brassy size. I'm going to, yes.
Putting the glue on does what? Helps the wire adhere to the
It helps.
body? Or just...
It helps the body adhere to the your thread base.
Okay, that's what I
So you'd
want.
put it on beforehand if you don't want to rivet, or if you just want added security.
I got you.
So I'm going to counter rib this with wire so that I am crossing all of those fibers in an opposite direction. And I'm going to end right up here at the top where that slot is. I'm going to try to tie this off so that that point ends at that slot. It's a nice way to hide where you tie in usually a thicker material like this brassy wire. And so I'm now going to hold tension on my bobbin. I'm going to take my wire, I'm going to helicopter it, just spin it in circles while holding on to it, and eventually it's going to break off. I didn't dull my scissors. I don't have a big tag I have to hide now. Everything's hidden. I do see a little spot sticking up that I'm going to pinch down with my fingernail, because it will cut your thread, and that's never fun because then everything comes undone. And now for the this thorax right here, up that fuzzy section there. We like to use some kind of like a hare's ear dubbing. This is a hare's ear plus. It's got a little bit of flash and synthetic materials in there. You can use rabbit dubbing, you can use whatever you want. This just picks out nicely and gives you kind of an accent of legs. And just like with Mark's fly last week, that's probably too much. We'll see when I get to it. But that's, you really need very little. And so I'm going to apply this to my thread just like we did with any other dubbing. Pinch and roll. I'll slide it up, and just right up against that. Actually, that wasn't enough. I thought I had too much. Right up against the bead, and then one wrap behind, and then end your thread right at that bead. Do a couple wraps so you can kind of see the orange, and we're going to build that hot spot collar with our whip finish, because if you build it too big before you whip finish, it's going to be even bigger after you finish your fly. So be a little conscious of how much thread is there, and see how I'm kind of working up that bead a little bit to get that thread to show. So that was a 4-turn whip finish. Well, you can see it better on that side. If you don't like how big it is, add another couple turns. Like this, I want to add a little bit more, just to add a little bigger hot spot. And that's that. Again, pretty easy. Color variations are limitless. Here's a black one with black dubbing and a black bead, a matte black bead, and a silver rib. Here's a black body with a copper collar. You can change bead colors, you can change collar colors, you can, I mean, really just like anything else, you can change to whatever color you think you want to do, or whatever material you have. But it's just a super effective fly. And these jig flies, you don't have to use them only with European style nymphing. They work great for dropper flies off of like a big hopper. You just have to, I probably wouldn't use a tungsten bead unless you have a foam fly. Because they are so heavy, they will tend to drown your dry flies. But yeah, that's your pheasant tail jig.